We all remember the imagery of the 1990s Middle East peace process, the globally celebrated handshake on the White House lawn. Behind this facade, the peace process functioned as a strategy for territorial expansion. On September 13, 1993, Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin signed the Declaration of Principles on Interim Self-Government. Arafat formally renounced terrorism and recognized Israel's right to exist, kicking off the 5-year Oslo peace process. Almost immediately after signing the agreement, the Israeli labor government betrayed its promises to halt expansion. The Oslo process acted as a diplomatic feint, disarming Palestinian militants while legitimizing the continued acquisition of Arab land. Between 1992 and 1996, the West Bank settler population expanded 39% to 145,000, with a major network of access roads. Simultaneously, East Jerusalem's Jewish population grew 800%, driven by thousands of subsidized housing units. The Oslo process provided a diplomatic shield, stalling international pressure, while the construction of settlements established permanent Israeli infrastructure on the ground. The Clinton administration brokered these talks, while maintaining a belief that the shared interests between the U.S. and Israel were permanent. Their actual blueprint was a 1988 report from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, called Building for Peace. This report served as a how-to manual for stalling negotiations to the point where Israel would not have to give up anything. It recommended that Palestinians must accept UN resolutions, while Israel was absolved of any reciprocal responsibility. The strategy hardened when Benjamin Netanyahu took power in 1996, armed with an approach called clean break. This subverted the U.S. brokered agreements entirely, giving Israel the right to forego its obligations if the Palestinians did not live up to theirs. It created a double standard where Israeli settlers could terrorize Palestinians, but any Palestinian retaliation was labeled non-compliance. By 1999 and 2000, President Clinton and Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak were trying to coerce Arafat into an agreement at the Camp David summit. The popular narrative is that Barak made a generous offer of 95% of the West Bank, and Arafat rejected it. The data shows no such offer was ever made. This map shows what Arafat was expected to agree to. Rather than a contiguous state, the proposal fractured the West Bank into 4 disconnected, isolated enclaves. While isolated, Israel retained total control over all water, roads, airspace, borders, the Jordan Valley, and East Jerusalem. Under this deal, the West Bank would function as a de facto prison camp, with the Israeli army acting as wardens. When the talks collapsed into violence, Arafat was trapped in a conflict against 3 distinct forces: the United States, Israel, and internal rivals in Hamas. This breakdown stemmed from Israel's refusal to recognize Palestine's right to exist. The U.S. brokered negotiations were structurally engineered to fail. As an Israeli team leader later admitted, U.S. negotiators only pushed the Palestinians to the farthest limit of what Israel could accept. Following the collapse of the peace talks, Israel escalated physical control by building the massive separation wall, snaking aggressively through the West Bank. When George W. Bush took office, he initially showed a brief flash of independence. In July 2003, he stated publicly it was very difficult to develop confidence in the peace process when a wall was snaking through Palestinian land. Ariel Sharon responded immediately, delivering a public rebuke right in the White House Rose Garden. He flatly declared that the security fence would continue to be built, regardless of the American president's stance. Bush quickly changed his tune. He dropped his objections entirely and began referring to the wall merely as a sensitive issue. Later, the International Court of Justice, the primary judicial branch of the United Nations, ruled that the wall is illegal. The court noted it amounts to a de facto annexation of Palestinian land, resulting in property destruction and a breach of international humanitarian law. Despite this objective global ruling, the United States denounced the judgment. Figures like UN Ambassador John Bolton challenged the court's jurisdiction, implicitly declaring to the world that America would defend Israel's actions regardless of international law. American leadership discarded its own political independence. They chose to protect a foreign nation's illegal annexations over upholding international legal standards. Direct financial aid reveals the immediate toll of this relationship. Between 1949 and November 1997, U.S. aid to Israel cost American taxpayers over $134 billion. That breaks down to $23,240 per Israeli citizen. Direct aid represents only a portion of the financial impact. Middle East economics expert Thomas Stauffer estimates that the cumulative economic drain on the United States since 1949 reaches $3 trillion. That figure includes massive secondary damages. U.S. support for Israel and sanctions against Middle Eastern regimes reduce American exports by about $5 billion a year. This specific loss destroys approximately 70,000 American jobs. Furthermore, American taxpayers subsidize the creation of the Israeli arms industry. Now, U.S. defense contractors are required to buy Israeli goods to support Israel's economy, draining another 125,000 American jobs. Per capita, this one-way pipeline from the U.S. Treasury costs every American more than $5,700 annually. This financial drain was made officially legal by the passage of the 1984 Cranston Amendment. This legislation requires all annual economic aid to Israel to be at least equal to its annual loan repayments, meaning all U.S. loans to Israel effectively function as outright gifts. This is the reality of the so-called special relationship. American taxpayers foot the bill for territorial expansion and military occupation, while American politicians secure the funding and subvert the peace process. Thank you so much for joining me today as we unpacked the reality behind the 1990s peace process. If you found this deep dive insightful, please hit that like button and subscribe to the Bookish Breakdown. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on today's episode, and I will see you in the next video.